coming, and hope that he's survived and his stress levels have survived all the vagaries of this morning, and hand over to you. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much, and thank you very much for the invitation. Can you hear me at the back okay, aye? Yeah, loud and clear. Good, good, good. Let's go over that one. I think Scott is going to give me a Survey Monkey stress audit later on today. Well, that's what he threatened to do anyway, so hey. If you look at the title, it's slightly different from what you were given, and there's a reason for this. Performance Management, the not so new workplace tyranny. And the reason for that is actually not so new. It's gone through even the new phase of performance management, with which I think we're all experiencing and suffering, has gone through another evolution. It is continually evolving, and I'll try to explain what I mean by that. Now, I want to start really, I did this report for the STUC, which you're welcome to have, and it's publicly available on many websites, I believe. But the origins of this report really chimed with something that Mark said in the contribution before the break. Because there was a man from the CWU, the Communication Workers Union in Scotland, Martin Keenan, who is a very decent man, who was increasingly getting members coming to him saying, I've got mental health issues, and he was either having to represent them in cases against management, but what he was also, because he was what Martin was doing was trying to find out more about what the phenomena of ill health was, depression and so on. So he studied it. And the diagnostic model that he was receiving from textbooks, of course, was tended to be an individual diagnostic model of, let's say, stress or mental ill health, depression, anxiety and so on. But the frequencies with which workers were coming to him with cases made him realise that he was not dealing with individual vulnerabilities here, but something which was systemic in the organisation, British Telecommunication, where his members were based. So this caused him, as a classic kind of, voyage of discovery and learning, to ask a number of other questions. Why is it that so many people are presenting with these cases? And of course he's not unaware of stress. He's not unaware that it's the single biggest cause of illness in the workplace. He's not unaware of this. But he also discovered that there had been a change in the regime in his organisation, British Telecommunication, the introduction of performance management, which he was able to connect, at least, in terms of an association, that this was the cause. So he proposed this investigation that I was asked to conduct by the STUC, to do a report for them, desk-based report, based upon an understanding of what constituted performance management and its effects on workers. So what do? I go to the textbooks, start looking at performance management. I understand some of it, but I read, and you know what? There's nothing in the HR literature really on performance management's effects on workers, let alone the effects of performance management and the causes and relationships to ill health. So that meant to do this report was not going to be a desk-based piece of work. I had to go and investigate the phenomena, cutting new ground in doing so. And so I ended up doing 31 really extensive interviews with stewards, health and safety reps and officers. Primarily this is from the financial services sector and from telecommunications. More than that, I've participated in, it's now up to about 30 union conferences, seminars and briefings over the last 3 years, where the issue of performance management has been discussed, debated, resolved upon and so on. So I've had access, if you like, privileged access, although privilege isn't necessarily a word you would think you'd use in this context, first-hand access to the accounts of people who've been suffering under the new performance management. So union respondents, like Mark and you and other people who will be speaking today, are mechanism experts. We know more about health and safety in the workplace than your Lord Young does. Is that controversial? It's not controversial, really. What Lord Young does, and this is a very important point for this discussion, is, if you've read the Young report, common sense, might be common sense for the business class and the Conservatives, but it's not common sense for humanity and workers, is to, at a stroke, remove what he calls low-risk workplaces, precisely the workplaces where stress is corroding and damaging people's lives. I also did extensive company documentation, so the report is robust. Now, an introduction to locate this. In tandem, and I don't think we can understand performance management extrapolated and separated from a much wider attack, legally, particularly on workers' rights that's taking place at the moment. I mean, I haven't got time to go through to it. Even the basic access to very elementary justice, right? In terms of taking a case to an employment tribunal is being denied many workers now. I'm sure you're aware of this. The imposition of fees, equality cases being even more punished, and so on. And the context of crash and the frenzy of privatisation that we still have, the neoliberalism, the austerity, all the unemployment, the cuts, the legal changes, the changes in health and safety regulation, the cuts to the HSE, and on. You've got this context taking place. However, what I will be talking about specifically is the offensive that is taking place at the front line of the workplace. And there are a number of elements to this, at least 3, and I'll mention them. Performance management, lean working, with which it is very closely associated, and, as has been mentioned before, sickness absence management and the new sickness absence management regimes that are taking place. What this evidence shows, and what is coming out from wider research that I've done over many years, is the fact that there seems to be a very important convergence taking place, because it's white-collar workers and manual workers and technical workers and professionals that are experiencing fairly similar things. Now, it's uneven, it manifests itself in different ways, but the pressures are causing similar things. And I spoke to, at the Hazards Conference, and people from the NASUWT spoke to me and said, what you've just described is what's happening to teachers, and of course it's happening to teachers. It's happening to lecturers in universities, it's happened to lab technicians, it's happening to workers, it's happening to BT engineers, for goodness sake. So there's a convergence taking place. And of course, for many of the workers affected by this, to reiterate the point, they're excluded. Much of what's taking place is going on below the radar in what are so-called low-hazard workplaces. Okay, you might not get your finger chopped off, but I tell you what, you can be disabled and not work again through the stress and the anxiety and the depression and the suffering that comes from that. It is a disgrace. My report, when it was published, had a 2-page feature in the Sunday Herald. I then got, I think I was getting about 10 emails a week. And some of them were really quite poignant. A woman, a mother, whose son had been put on the final stage of a disciplinary process for underperformance in BT. It would break your heart reading these narratives. And I know all of you have stories similar to this. So, just to put this into a little bit of context, think what's happened since 2008, particularly with the recession, is something like this, right? This is, generally speaking, employers' approach to managing what they consider to be a cost reduction imperative. How do we do it? Now, of course, round this circle will be downsizing, redundancies, reorganisation and what have you. But I want to just touch on the 4 elements that might slot in. These are not mutually exclusive, of course. Organisations will use them in combination. Outsourcing and offshoring. Still going on. Outsourcing. I was talking there to the fellow from the POA, where is he? Alright, we're talking about Serco, right? Serco have just bought over a Carphone warehouse. Serco bought, we could go down the road of Capita. Huge chunks. Capita are now probably the 3rd or the 4th biggest financial sector organisation in the country. Did you know that? Capita. Reduced terms and conditions. That's what the employers got away with in Grangemouth. Automation. In some parts of the service sector, getting the customers to do it for themselves. But the bit I want to concentrate on is this snappily titled little number, work intensification, lean performance management and sickness absence policies. And that's kind of what I'll be focusing on. Incidentally, the star at the top comes from a program that was used in one company. Kind of all of these things were involved. And the company called it, let's get this right, Strategic Transformations and Renewal. However, the workers called it something else. Sackings, terminations and redundancies, which was a more apt description of what was going on. Now let's start. Lean performance management and work intensification. Now this is most important, obviously, for the point of view of those people who have survived the various job culls that have taken place over the last few years. But to sum it up, this integrated managerial offensive is squeezing increasing effort out of workers. It's, in a way, the cost-cutting strategies distill down and boil down to into this unprecedented intensification of work, right? So it's not just, the debate gets a little bit fuzzy sometimes. It is true that workers are working longer hours and doing unpaid work at weekends, at home and all the rest of it. It's true, but it's also what is happening within the boundaries of recognised work time, where a lot of the crap is taking place, that workers are being squeezed through restructuring, re-engineering, lean, creative synergies. That's one of my favourites. Yes, I think we'll bring in some creative synergies. What does that mean? It means whacking two bits of an organisation together and getting rid of folk, so you work harder. Essentially, the upshot of this is equivalent or larger volumes of work have been done with either the same size of workers, the same number of workers, or likely fewer workers. So you have the sheer intensity of work at the working day. I've used a phrase that comes from Karl Marx here, the porosity of the working day, and apologies if people have heard this before, but the idea that the working day or your working time is porous to an extent. There's gaps in the working day. There have to be gaps, for that is when your brain and your body recover. What is happening now, of course, is the porosity is getting squeezed, 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 the gaps are becoming smaller, and that has musculoskeletal and psychosocial effects upon many, many workers. Lean working. I'll deal with this in a few minutes. Now, how many here know about lean working?
No shit.
Stick your hands right up so I can have a look. How many of you have experienced lean working in your workplaces? Right? Oh, sorry, right. Oh. So, a good number, but some haven't. So, I'll explain some of the rudiments, the fundamentals of lean working. The core thesis of lean working, which stemmed originally from the motor vehicle industry, was that organisations which strip out wasteful processes or wasteful parts of processes will gain significantly in terms of quality and efficiency. And the rhetoric was bound up with multi-skilling. You know, your tasks will be enlarged. They will get more interesting. You'll have more and varied and interesting things, things to do. And workers will participate in this, in something called Kaizen. Who knows what Kaizen means? Did you? Yeah, absolutely. Yes, exactly so. Exactly so. Continuous improvement. So essentially, a cynic would look at this and go, it's turkeys voting for Christmas. In the managerial speak of Womack, nothing to do with that great American soul singer, by the way. I don't want guilt by association here, the great Bobby Womack. But Womack, Roos and Jones, these punters from Cardiff University, in their study, the idea was continuous improvement, enhances worker skills and so on. And the argument was, this is the work smarter, not harder mantra. This is where it came from. And Lean's claim to remove mind-numbing stress with what they called creative stress. In this narrative, stress is a good thing. Stress is something that is desirable to improve quality and efficiencies. And the type of stress, I'll kind of symbolise this or give the best example, is through the traffic light system. People might be aware of the traffic light system, right? Green, amber, red. You don't want workers on green, because they can obviously do a hell of a lot more. You don't want workers on red, because they're messing up. What you want, and this is the objective in Lean, is to have workers in a permanent state of amber, where they can be pushed to do more, they feel insecure and uncertain that they're not delivering enough, and that this ever-present kind of pressure is there producing this so-called creative stress. But of course, the real evidence comes when critical social sciences get a hold of this, and not just consultants, etc. And Paul Stewart's book on the automobile industry, a good book it is too, showed tighter supervisory control, narrow tasking, job stress, managerial bullying, lack of voice, all of this. What we also have, and what a lot of you are getting actually, is a bit like second or third wave Lean, which is coming through what I call them consultemics, right? They're consultants who are working in universities. They're complete bloody frauds, by the way, because they produce for the employers just what the employers want to hear. And they have developed a narrative of pushing efficiency savings through Lean to the public sector, to financial services, to NHS, to higher education, to a whole number of white-collar occupations and professions that 10 years ago you would not have been believed. The same sort of engineering, machine, rationalisation, efficiency logics. And these people are disgraceful. Zoe Radner, we've tried to debate with her on Lean for over a number of years. She said in one of the reports into the HMRC, workers regard Lean favourably. Oh really? Well, here's 1,000 questionnaires from workers in HMRC that we've got. How many workers did you speak to, Zoe? 5. Well, we interviewed 1,000 and have 875 responses, which we can draw upon. No wonder she won't debate with us. In HMRC, Lean created essentially a brutal form of Taylorism. This is one of our kind of research projects. Before Lean, workers were saying, what percentage of workers felt very pressurised before Lean? Handfuls. After Lean, 95%. Pressure had increased a great deal. And these experiences are really universal. There is a sad, fundamental dissatisfaction with occupations, jobs like this, semi-skilled, white-collar work that has become leaned, reorganised, recalibrated. Customer services has really degenerated at the same time as the work has deteriorated and so on. And it's true of so many things. What we did in our study was try to understand some of the statistical relationships that exist. So it wasn't good enough to say, this is stressful. So what we did was establish statistical relationships between work intensity, time spent at the workstation, coming to work ill, and a number of symptoms, right? This article has just been published, by the way. So have a look at this. This is one kind of slide from what we did. Ill health symptoms and time spent at the workstation, right? At the bottom, almost half of these are tax offices, right? In old inland revenue places. Almost half spend more than 95% of the time at the workstation, right? At the workstation. Porosity, closed. Can't go and have a chat with your mates about how crap your football team was, or I'll do the pub the other night, guess who I'm here. Can't do that. Task, no gaps. Right? If you work more than 95% of the time and spend it on your workstation, continuously engaged in tasks, amazingly, no shit Sherlock, social science. Wish money penny. Straight for sure, Irish money penny. Mental fatigue, 62% say they suffer from it daily or several times a week, right? If you're at your workstation for more than 95% of the time. Physical tiredness, stiff shoulders, stiff neck. Stress, 42%. daily or several times a week if you're working with that level of intensity. It's not bloody great actually if you're less than 85% and so on, but these sorts of relationships can help bring a case that mobilise union members to take to management to say, actually, it's work intensity and the changes in the job and the work organisation that's causing a lot of this crap. And here, of course, is the new model. The new model call centre workstation. Marvellous. Get rid of those unneeded toilet breaks. You're joking, don't you? You really do think I'm joking. There is, and Scott, apologise because I mentioned this last week, the student loans operation in Glasgow had the time and motion people in, right? I told this joke to a room full of Europeans last week. What's he talking about? You'll get it. They followed people into the toilets, right? Literally, not just measuring toilet breaks, a lot of call centres do that. They followed people to the toilets, people come out the cubicles and say, well, what did you have? Was it another one? I'm not joking, by the way, they literally did this until the union put a stop to it. So, it puts a new dimension to the notion of time and motion. long time getting there. Performance management. Right, now, essentially, management is entirely based upon measurement or performance, the measurement of performance. It's a central managerial function, isn't it, to measure, monitor, measure, count, you know, the science so-called of management, right? If you look at the human resource management textbooks, the prescriptive ones, and I read quite a few for this report, you see that the language is one of alignment of the individual with the organisational objective. You must know this if you've read anything. I mean, you'll see that in all the performance management bump that you get for your employers. The individual and the organisation will be aligned. As we said, sorry joke, Scott, you've heard the joke before. It's like a bastardised form of Feng Shui. Organisation and individual marching in step, right, at the same time. And the language in these textbooks is incredible. You know, performance management is, it is held about, it's agreed objectives, shared coaching, mutual expectations, dialogue, support, guidance. I reckon George Orwell, when he was writing 1984 in the Isle of Jura, right, he was having a wee whiskey, and he thought, nah, fuck that, I'll have some crack cocaine instead. Or crystal meth. All right, let's make it topical here, you know. Right, he's gone, that Breaking Bad, I'm gonna break bad. So he's Breaking Bad, he has some crystal meth, he has some wild ideas about the future, some of which ended up in 1984, but some of which ended up on the cutting room floor. And one was a system of managerial control in which you use language like agreed, shared, mutual, support, guidance. And he went, while the practice is entirely the opposite. And he went, that's too far-fetched. Nobody will believe that. I'm going to cut that out and stick to Oceania going with the war with all the rest of it. I'll stick to the old others, which is why we got 1984 without the performance management bit in it. That, you know, speculation. Anyway, performance management historically has always been synonymous with performance appraisal, or performance appraisals, reprisals, as they're often called. And for a lot of time, and I'm sure most of you here have had appraisals of one kind or another, we all have appraisals of one kind or another. These were for a period annual rituals. They may well have been tied to bonuses or forms of performance-related pay. The problem always, and still is with appraisal, is the element of subjectivity. Who decides what ranking you get? Who decides what rating you get? By what criteria are you measured, etc., etc. If you look at the HR texts, no problem. Managing underperformance, if there is underperformance, is regarded as a positive process. Michael Armstrong, the single best-selling HR text in the country. Again, it's like, wow, there's this world out there of official discourse, and there's this world here of real lived experience, and they are so far apart. Performance management has changed really quite quickly now. It's not periodic and retrospective, but I would argue performance management has become something that's continuous It's forward-looking in that it's trying to get workers to do things in the future, whilst at the same time being backward-looking in terms of reward as well. But this is the important point. You've had this shift to disciplinary purpose underpinning it. That's what's important. And this is where you get your performance improvement plans, your PIPs. Who here has got PIPs in their organisation? You've got PIPs. Or, I mean, and they're in the second or third or fourth evolution now. Managing performance, IIPs, PIMS. I believe they have that in the south of England in the summer. And the real bite in performance management is this improvement thing. And micromeasurement, management of individual performance, facilitated by the technologies. You speak to BT engineers, an excellent example. They're monitored by the mobile phone, the GSM in the cab, having to switch on a laptop. This has had a major effect on the structure and pacing of work. Average time jobs, I'm going about this at like average time jobs. Where are you? If you go 2 miles when your home red lights flashes, binga, 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 binga. You know, all of this sort of stuff as well. And then a lot of this stuff in terms of white collar work has come from the call centres. You can track it through the measurement of average call handling times, AHTs, call handling times, average times. And what is happening? Just get this idea in your head, because this solves many problems. Why is this happening? It's happening because organisations at the very top decide on the key performance indicators that will govern their organisation. The key performance indicators decided at the top, if it's a private sector, what are our market expectations, are then distilled down into service level agreement targets, right? Which managers, middle managers have to operate down to team leader level and ultimately down to individual workers. So you have this cascading of targets down through organisations, often in a claustrophobic manner, in a far kind of comprehensive way than ever before. What these targets also do, and this is where at the stage of an evolution of this film, is undermining the role of the frontline manager, right, to undertake discretion as part of the management process. It's a wee bit like, Kapita says, no. Figures have come from above, no. It dehumanises the managerial process. Are you with me? Yeah. So the reification of figures, right, becomes the thing, not the human intervention of supervisors below. I've been speaking to people in Prospect. They say that they're both the victims and the perpetrators of this, because they're kind of managerial grades, you know, supervisory grades. Very important insight that. Often, and we know this, it's in the report, managers can be given targets for the numbers of managed exits they make. Incentivising managers for shit behaviour. How many people can you get out of your organisation on underperformance? How many people have you got on sickness absence actions? How many people have you got on PIPs? It's true. So the incentivisation for managers is based sometimes on this. It raises a wider question about what constitutes bullying. They've got conventional ideas in their heads about bullying. Maybe it'd be somebody who's in a vulnerable position and an individually predisposed nasty manager. What happens when it's systemic? What happens when it's the numbers what is doing the bullying? What happens when it's not possible to make an individual kind of complaint against the perpetrator of the bullying, because the bullying is actually resting in a series of numbers and stats and seemingly objective criteria above. So we have to keep this in our head. These numbers are challengeable, because even the so-called measurable, the stats, the metrics, are challengeable. They're pseudoscience. They are parameters that are determined and set by management. But this is probably the most important part of the research that I did. And some of you have seen this, but if you haven't, and this is by popular request, I have to say, the scientific basis of my study. This is true. All of this is true. Remember that. First day at work, you listen to sweet soul music, Not really been hit with performance management, it's no problem. Nice.
Oh, sweet.
Oops. Oh no, that's the wrong one. I need to find this. There is a tune here. Groovy. First day work is groovy, isn't it? No problem. Groovy, baby. Reminds me of that story of a kid going to work in a factory in the Industrial Revolution. Some of you will have heard this, right? The kid goes and works, 19-year-old, 17-year-old, younger possibly, goes to work in a factory in Lancashire cotton mills in the 19th century. And he comes back from work and his mum says to him, "How'd you get on today?" He says, "Yeah, that was great, that. I really enjoyed my work." He says, quite a long day, but I really enjoyed my work. Ah, I said, "I'm glad I've done that now. Yeah, I wouldn't like to do it every day though." After 3 months, targets get hyped up, you listen to Motorhead. You've got no idea where you're coming and going. Lemmy, God rest his soul. That's where we were last night. He couldn't make it because he's not well. What's wrong with that? After 9 months, you are now an underperformer. You start listening to Napalm Death. The day starts at 8 o'clock and ends at 8 o'clock. Essentially, you go mental. Birmingham band, by the way. I have 6 stage of problems, so I have 12 months you put on a pip, you listen to hip hop, you're passive aggressive, most of the time you put on weight, you are stressed. Good tune, good tune. After 15 months you're given a warning. You listen to gangster rap, you've seriously considered gunning down your team leaders. You fall from bed every day, you live in chips and caffeine. Doesn't everybody? And this is what happens. Straight out of Compton. Straight out of Compton.
If something happens in South Central Los Angeles.
Bang. The 6th stage of performance management, after 18 months, you listen to LMFAO. I was going to update this to Glee or What's the Fox Say, but I couldn't get it. You have totally and utterly lost it. See you later. There you go. And all of that is true, by the way. Don't let anybody tell you it's not true. That's good scientific research, that. So, you have management totally obsessed with measurables, deliverables, metrics, stats, management information systems. And they're devising new ways of kind of measuring and monitoring as well. So you have these quantitative targets that are strictly imposed. I think I mentioned this before, but is a plausible case to be developed for saying that these kind of imposition of targets started in the contact sectors and spread to the back office, and then kind of more widely. If you look at HMRC, the fragmentation of a work process, say with mail coming in, used to be uneven workload. Some tasks may take half an hour, some would take 2 hours, some would take half a minute. You don't know what's coming in, it's uneven workload, you know, uneven demand or complexity of cases. And now, of course, the fragmentation means 6 tax cases an hour. If you're opening letters, you're on 80. It's a flow chain that passes it from one to the other. This is lean, get rid of the wasteful processes. In the process, what they've done actually is remove, take out, it's another story, I haven't got time to go into it, the tacit knowledge that actually meant that people who are defrauding, not paying the taxes. You know, the big cases, it's much more difficult to do now because you can't take a case, go home and go, oh, I know how he did that, and come back in 2 days later, the case is gone. You don't have whole case working, is what I'm saying. as part of it. BT engineers I've mentioned, universities, workload models, dashboards, I call them something else, boards, the research assessment exercise. Most of these measures predated the crisis. They're not simply, although employers of course have taken advantage of the difficulties that workers have faced over the last few years in the labour market situation, but they predate it. And the watchwords in virtually all organisations are doing more with less. If I hear that again, the new normal. Don't you realise this is the new normal? New normal of what? New normal of people being driven insane by work. But of course, you have a range. What gets measured now is not just the quantitative behaviour, the quantitative stuff. It's the qualitative stuff. Attitudes, traits, behaviours, demeanour. In one finance sector company, I've selected this one, right? I've got 5 more minutes, yeah? Is that all right? Yeah. I mean, these were the criteria. Delight the customer, speaks up. Speaks up. People get marked down for not speaking up, right? Imagine a team meeting, a brief that starts at the beginning of a shift. A team of 15 people. Team meeting takes 10 minutes, right? The team leader speaks for 5 or 6 minutes, right? And there's a bit of shuffling about, silences and can't be asked this. And so that leaves, let's say, 4 minutes for 15 people, theoretically, to make an equal and meaningful contribution. It's preposterous. Can't be done. And you look at if you look at the performance management evaluation for this, there's about 10 different criteria under this, or measurements. Speaks regularly at team meetings, speaks regularly with enthusiasm and constructive suggestions. It is a license for team leaders and managers to do what they like to people in terms of a subjective evaluation. You know what? The quieter ones are sometimes the more effective ones. You don't speak up at team meetings, you get penalised, etc., etc. I could go on about this. Do what is right for the customer, community and organisation, putting aside one's own agenda. Pay increases, health and safety, things that interest you. That's what that's about. That is a subliminal, ideologically laden message. And the one that I like best of all is act like the owners of the business. Remember, this is the financial services sector we're talking about here. I'm not even going to the co-op. I'm not going there. It's not fair. But let's just consider the Royal Bank of Scotland for a minute. I'll stick £850,000 of bonuses in my pocket and fuck off. So, if you work in a bank, you've been given license to act like the owners of the business. I think what they mean is, they want you to be kind of Kaizen and take massive responsibility, not to snort crystal meth or dabble with ketamine, which of course, as everybody knows, is a horse tranquilizer. Let's move on. So there's greater room for subjectivity and ulterior motives in all of that. Leaves people vulnerable to the whim of a supervisor. Telecoms regional officer. Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. And then this, of course, is possibly the apex, the anchor of this system. The performance management bell curve. Who has this in their own experience or has experienced it? Some of you who have not stuck your hands up may well have it, and you don't know about it, but it probably is there, because organisations are not too kind of forthcoming and saying, yeah, we operate the bell curve. Why? Because it's discriminatory. What is the problem with this? What's the problem with this? Just throw this out. What's wrong with this?
It's arbitrary.
It's arbitrary. Absolutely. One. What else?
It makes it easier to performance manage people at the door.
Makes it easy to performance manage people out the door. Yep. What else is wrong with that?
Not realistic to tasks, it's not realistic to the real world.
It's not realistic to the real world. This is forced distribution. I mean, you can drive a coach and horses through this, really. Right, okay. Good guy. Just about. There, what? Ooh, meets expectations. The 3.001. Right? 2.9998. Bad guy. It's arbitrary. Human behaviour doesn't correspond to this. Actually, it's completely counterproductive. Furthermore, management actually, if management's serious about it, they shouldn't have underperformers. The bulge should be like this. Everybody should be good. And what I say also, arguing with management, senior management, I did this once in the conference in India, brilliant. I said, logically, I said, why can't everybody be excellent? Because not everybody is excellent. Okay. What happens, I said, if everybody's shit? Does this mean that you still give 10% of people, I mean, just for the sake of the logic of the argument, human behaviour doesn't, performance doesn't. Anyway, the criteria used to measure human behaviour, i.e. performance in this sense, are all completely subjective as well. I'll come back to this in a minute, but last week, very, very significant news that Microsoft has dumped this. Did anybody pick up on this? They dumped it last week because they said it's absolutely been the most corrosive thing in the management of human people they've had over the past decade. Dead interesting. And of course, banks and other organisations say, you know what? Hey, we don't do it, or if we do, it's merely for indicative purposes. My arse. This comes from a bank's own evaluation of itself, and they denied, well, we don't do the bell curve, but our expected performance ratings distribution curve looks like this. Hell yeah. BT denied that they did the bell curve. What did I do? Anybody here from BT? What did BT do? I got a load of the CWU's reports last year. This is a survey they did of the members. What rankings did you get? And go, wow, isn't that amazing? Just kind of came out like this. Incredible. So, in terms of what Scott says, absolutely right. It is a lot of the time about getting people out of the door without having to pay anything very much for it. Maybe a compromise agreement, maybe a small sum. I'll come back to that in a minute. But the language that's used, you have not achieved, you're an underachiever, over and over again. Worse than non-union places, obviously. There's still widespread discontent over these. There's widespread discontent over these rankings, and it is interesting, and I'll finish on that, the ways in which unions have begun to engage, to improve, to challenge what's going on. And it is possible to do so. But you get organisations moving the goalposts. We lump all the twos in with the ones. Yesterday a 2 was just about passable. Now a 1 isn't. But this is key to understanding how the whole system works. Are people familiar with this? The round table process, the calibration. Do people know what this is about? Sometimes it's called grandparenting. Let's say you've got a team leader who decides to give 7 5s where 5 is good and 3 4s because the team's done brilliantly. That's another contradiction, isn't it? People are in teams. Why the chuff are they measured individually? Surely it should be collective team output. If teams reflect different strengths and so on. Anyway, calibration level is a meeting of team leaders and a senior management comes down and goes, oh, you've been too generous there. But they're brilliant. Oh, too generous. It is a process from the top that ensures that over-generosity or inflated scores cannot be distributed to individual team members on the ground. And it has, the connection also is to ensure that fixed pots of money are not exceeded in terms of distribution. It's often tied to finance. It's also about ensuring that sufficient number of people are identified for managing out the organisation, the speed of managing people out the organisation. And these banks are looked at 6 weeks. The other thing that's crucial, and we're only beginning to get to grips with it, and this is from the Prospect. Prospect survey was great, it should be on the website, because they actually did a wee bit of, what's the word, putting statistics together, relational analysis, right? They found, if you're black or Asian, you were older, were a part-time worker or had a disability, you are between 14 or 17% more likely to get a poor ranking. Oh, so there are discriminatory practices underneath this, are there? So a very simple demand for unions could be, can we please have a look at the distribution of your rankings on performance management for this section, that section, and what have you? Yeah? And they're not compared like with like across organisations. Interesting, isn't it? The scale of intimidation. We worked this out. When one bank, 10% of people were on PIPs at one time. That was the Clydesdale Bank, actually. I will name names. And then if you look at the prospect survey again, it is really interesting. About 1/3 of people who reported the survey said they'd been an underperformer or been put on a progression or improvement plan at one time over the last year. Wow, that's really high. If you go back 2 years, probably some would be recidivists, but there would be other people in that category as well. It is about instilling fear in organisations and individualising and breaking people up. And these people, a lot of this comes from Jack Welch, by the way, in GE, and disseminated a lot through McKinsey, for God's sake. McKinsey saying, rank and yank, get rid of the bottom 10% of people in an organisation in any 1 year, and your organisation will become fresher, more efficient, better, and so on. Why is somebody even allowing for the socially constructed and wrong criteria that puts people in the bottom category? Why are they there? They might be carers. Their partner might have got cancer. They might have lost a loved one. They might be going through a relationship breakdown. They might be, whatever reason. Okay? Here's one, the car park conversation. You can read this for yourself, because I better rattle along. The practice that's widespread of the tap on the shoulder and the insinuation to get rid of people out of the organisation. This was an HR manager from BT who was quite happy to go on the record about this and tell us, you know, we were given training how to conduct these conversations. You know your last review, it's only gone one way, isn't it? You should think about coming to an arrangement. Sowing the seeds of doubt and indecision and insecurity in the workers' minds, so they come the next way and say, yeah, a few thousand quid and we'll be out of here. A means of downsizing. Consequences for workers, you can read this. Couple of minutes in sickness absence management. I haven't got time to go into it, right? Sickness absence management. We get hit every year with the same myth that Britain is undergoing an epidemic of people at it. Taking duvet days is the latest phrase for this. Sickness absence. We've heard earlier on the extent to which people, when they're genuinely ill, are taking holidays to cover up from this, or not declaring that they've got stress. One of the bits of survey we did is, I can't admit at work that I'm stressed out by this. So it's covered up by people taking leave days. It is shocking. And you know what? The statistical evidence shows, and this, we've got to keep this in our heads, there are fewer people, right, being off. Sickness absence levels are at historically low levels, lower than they have ever been. It's true. And people are dragging themselves into work when they're ill, coming back to work when they're prematurely, when they haven't fully recovered. They're getting whacked with the Bradford factor and all sorts of shit metrics that penalise short-term sickness and probably make things worse. Presenteeism is the problem. Fear of discipline, you mentioned it, people are frightened. You don't now have the human right to recover from illness. An utter disgrace. Yes, you know, the CBI says, we lost, what's it, $1 billion last year in sickness absence. Yes, because people get sick. I think, well, conclusion, few points. Punitive performance management and sickness absence policies are short-termist, but they are being driven by this kind of essential objective of cost-cutting. We can construct, I was thinking about this, Malcolm X, by any means necessary, opposition at different levels. There is a business soft HRM case. I'm going to be looking at the Microsoft case in some detail, actually. I think we can all use it. Here's Microsoft, who's ditched the bell curve, by the way. Why did they do it? Because it's inefficient. Right? Not just as it's inhumane, it doesn't work in terms of a business case. I've had 3 or 4 organisations come to me over the last 6 months saying, can you tell us why things aren't working? It's all down to, can you give us evidence against our arguments against the bell curve and performance management? So, I'm not saying it's a universal argument, but probably the hawks in the boards of directors, the hawks in senior management, the doves rather, want to put forward a case to minimise the kind of the serious management scientist kind of stats, KPIs all the way down the line thing. So it isn't a case. The bell curve has to be rejected as inapplicable to employee performance in principle and practice. It's potentially discriminatory. I think I've demonstrated that. It's possible for us to conduct audits by gender, age, status, etc. Unions at workplace level actively challenge unfair ratings before the event as well as after. Don't wait till the outcome of until you get your ones and twos before challenge it. Try to encourage workers to appeal. Oh, and if part of the agreement says, I need coaching in the middle somewhere to improve, to make sure I got a good employment, yeah, get it documented. Request coaching to improve my performance as per the agreement. If coaching not given, which it often isn't, or training not given, it's down there in record. So all of that stuff is dead important. And appeal the rankings, the health and safety stress audits, broader opposition to the wider kind of Beecroft agendas and so on. I think us, have a job. I was speaking to people yesterday about this actually, how the public exposure of the worst cases of new tyranny in the contemporary workplace. It is absolutely shocking that this experience that people are suffering from, is not reflected in the mainstream media, nor on the television. When was the last documentary you heard about the realities of work in contemporary Britain? You don't see it. Pick up The Guardian on a Saturday. Work. It's not about work. It's about senior management's careers, basically, and work-life balance. And that's an important issue, but you know, for very senior people. The CWU has been in a position over the past probably 3 years where it's almost gone into national industrial action, strike action over performance management. Have a look at the Communication Workers Union, The Voice, to have a look at how that's kind of panned out. I don't think it's been resolved at all. Furthermore, and I haven't mentioned this point, actually, if it's bad in unionised workplaces, in many non-unionised workplaces, it is really bad. And I've got a fund of horrible stories, I have to say. So performance management can be a means, an opportunity, an attraction to help win workers to understanding the importance of collective organisation, to recruiting people in non-union workplaces. But there are many ways this can and is being kind of challenged. So I don't want to leave you with just, oh my God, there is this horrendous big beast out there. We need to understand the beast in order to be able to challenge it effectively. Thank you.